I want to say that WordPress is easy to use, but the fact is that people get lost inside WordPress. WordPress loses people. And so today I want to talk a little bit about where people get lost and how you can get back on track. So one of the first things is if you have a website set up and you're starting to customize it. Well, here's a plain vanilla WordPress website. So we'll log in. I think a lot of people's first reaction is, what happened to my website? I had a nice looking website and now I'm off in this gray land. Well, you're behind the scenes in the website. And so you can still switch back and forth by going up to the top here. You go to visit website or visit dashboard. And this is set up. This is basically a few panels that allow you to access all your blog posts, all your media, which would be images or PDFs that you've uploaded previously, all your pages, any comments that you allow on your site. And then there's a section of different setup options for changing the look, the theme of the site, for changing this more specific design, to changing the settings, to deciding what plugins you want installed. If we add RSVP Maker, which is a plugin that I created for event marketing, for email marketing, we actually pick up a couple of new content sections. So there's this whole RSVP events section to add a new event and also to retrieve the RSVP report. We have a newsletter section, an event invitation section that's oriented towards email content. And then if we turn on also a Toastmasters extension that I've built for a number of clubs. And this is where I've gotten a lot of experience working with people who are not necessarily techies, not necessarily web professionals, but they're trying to learn how to build an effective website. And one of my challenges is to try and make this as simple for them as I can. But the Toastmasters plugin adds a whole section of things that are specific to Toastmasters tasks, Toastmasters activities. And for each of these plugins, there's also under settings a section for it. So if we go into RSVP Maker, this is where we would set our defaults for, do we always collect registrations or only some of the time? And so similarly, there is a section for the Toastmasters plugin where you would set up your officers and set up whether you want people to get automatic reminders before each meeting. Those kinds of things that you would go into this area to set up. And if you turn other plugins on, they may have a whole bunch of other settings and options, and it can get complicated fairly quickly. Now, we can simplify things. So for a basic Toastmasters member, they don't have any editing superpowers or administrative superpowers. They're going to see where they can go in and customize their own profile. They can set their passwords, they can set their profile picture. And there are a couple of other things that we make available to all members, but they wouldn't see all the complexity of the editing system. For those of you who are coming in as website administrators, whether it is for a Toastmasters website or any small business website, here are some of the things that you might want to know how to navigate through, things that people can get confused by. One of them is when we're logged in, you have the power to edit any page on your site. You also have the power to edit the design of your site. And there are somewhat confusingly, two different editing buttons up at the top of the screen. So this black bar that appears at the top of the screen is a menu of administrators items. If you click on Edit Site, you go into a space where you can change the overall design of the website. If you click on Edit Page, then you're going to be editing that specific page, whether it's your home page or another page. Some cases it might say Edit Post, it might say Edit Event, depending on the type of content that you're viewing. But the basic principle is that you need to understand the difference between editing the design and editing the content. Let's look at editing the design. Now you'll only see this Edit Site button if you are an administrator. So somebody else who might be set up to have some editing right, if they're set up as an editor but not an administrator, they wouldn't see this option. So if you have the option to go into Edit Site, this is where we can edit the overall design of the site. Now again, stuff just disappeared. Where did the content of my page go? Well, we're not seeing that because this is a template that is used for all of your pages. That this is where we want the title to go, and it should be centered. If we instead wanted it to be aligned to the left, we can make that change here. We could change the color of it. So we could change the styling. So this little half moon icon is the styling options. And so I could change that to always be the magenta color or the blue color. And by the way, these are standard Toastmasters brand colors in the context of the Toastmasters website. If you were doing a small business website, you would have different defaults here. But again, this is just placeholders. This says if there is a featured image that has been set for the blog post or the web page, I want it to appear in this spot. I want the main content of the article to appear down here. Now, if we instead go into the edit page, then we don't see all those design elements, but we do see the specific content of the web page or the blog post if we were editing a blog post. But whatever the specific content is, this is where we see that and can work with that. And there's a bunch of default content loaded in here. Actually, to show you some basic principles, I'm going to start by adding my own content. So this is a paragraph. And another one. So if I just go in and start typing, I get paragraphs. If I want to add another type of content, I can click on this little plus button here and say add a heading. So this is a subhead within my page. Now there are several ways of adding different types of content. So they're known as content blocks. And so we can say, I want to add an image. So I showed you how we can do it by clicking here. We can add an image. Or if I know that the type of block is called image, I can just type the slash key, and that serves as a search function. So add image. Again, it's going to add a placeholder for an image. And from here, I can either upload something from my computer, or if content has been uploaded to the website previously, I'll be able to find it in the media library. In this case, it's just those things. But we can add some more flowers here and select and insert that into the page. Now, when you're trying to add new text, it's relatively easy to just click at the end of the line and hit enter. But what if you have two images butting up against each other? This is where it comes really handy to be able to do add before and add after. So I do add after, it opens up a blank line for me, and then I can add a new content block. There's one other whole way of adding these content blocks or different types of content. So I showed you the plus, I showed you the type slash and your search terms, but there's also this in the upper left-hand corner, and this actually gives you a little bit easier, more extensive way of searching for different types of content blocks. So this one is meant to be a quote, maybe that's a testimonial quote about your business, your club. And we can also add media from this area. We can either add images that have been previously uploaded to the site, or there is this whole search engine for open source public domain images. So we can put in a search term here like flower and get a flower that we can insert into our page. If I want to add a little bit of formatting, I can choose a couple of paragraphs that I want to format the same way, and I can do group. And then after I do group, I might do add a yellow background and make the color of the text blue. And let's put a border around that as well. So we're going to make it a blue border, and we can adjust how thick that border should be. And from there we can add some padding and margin. So the difference between padding and margin is that when I add padding, it will add more space inside the border of my content block. If I add margin, it's going to add space outside the border of my content block. You also have some special types of groups, such as columns. When I add columns, it'll ask me how many columns, how they should be arranged. So I can do 3 columns, and then within each of these columns, I can add, say, an image from my library. And this one gets another image from the library. And this one gets an image that I'm going to upload. And so this can be good for, say, presenting 3 alternatives side by side and having them formatted in a consistent way. Now, for each content block, there are some options available. In the right sidebar, and if the right sidebar is not being displayed, you can toggle that on and off. But it'll show you the file name of the image, and there's some alternative text which you can put in as assistance for the blind, and it's also assistance for search engine. So there's content, and there's settings. The settings is where we would maybe adjust the size of that image. Do we want the whole thing to be displayed? You can see it easier maybe down here, where this one is being displayed in the large format. Full size within that space is going to be basically the same, or medium, or thumbnail. And when we make it thumbnail, it gets squared off as well. Beyond that, we have the Stylings tab, where we can find, again, places to set margin around the image. There's no padding option here, but also I set the general dimensions by choosing that this should be a thumbnail, but if I wanted to make it really small, I could change it to being just 25 pixels or 120 pixels. So I could arbitrarily change the width and the height here, and generally it's going to change them proportionally. If I didn't specify the second value, it'll just make it proportional to the first value. Now, it can be easy to get lost, particularly when you start putting things in columns, in groups, to understand what's going on, because we could have columns inside a group. And this document outline view, which you toggle on in the upper left-hand corner, there's this little stair step icon. This allows you to see how things are arranged. I could take these columns and actually drag them into the group here. And so now I would have those things grouped together. So now I have a group that defines the border and the background color, and I have the columns that have the images embedded in them, and then I have the paragraphs. And so this is where things, again, they start to get complicated, but it does allow you to create more complex layouts. Now, one of the things that's not absolutely consistent is I was showing you that breakdown of basic settings and then design. For a paragraph in the current version of WordPress, and this may change again, there is no Stylings tab. However, there is a section here where we can set padding and margin. So those basically just have to be turned on, and we can adjust the padding around that paragraph. So we're just changing it for one specific paragraph in this case. If I go back up here to this plus sign, I showed you inserting individual blocks from this area, and it does have them a little bit more categorized. That's good. You can insert media, but you can also insert a whole pattern. So a pattern is a set of blocks that have been prearranged. In many cases, they've been created by professional designers. And so they're supposed to be attractive layouts that you can work with, where you can change the images to be more specific to your club or your business. And so I just inserted a whole bunch of content there all at once. And then if I want to change some of this, I can click on this image and say replace. And we'll actually just replace that with this flower image. And so it keeps the overall layout. It keeps the proportions of the image. It keeps the rounded corners that have been set on this image. And it keeps the general layout. So we can change the text and the images working within this predefined layout. And then suppose I want to make changes to the basic, maybe I don't like this gray background here. Well, I can't change that immediately from right here because I'm not actually seeing everything that's going on. And if we looked at our outline view, we could see that this is all kind of grouped together under this heading because this is what's called a pattern. But I can make changes to the pattern. I just have to say edit pattern. And now it's going to open this up in a format where I can make changes to the individual components. So now I've selected this outer block here, which is a group, really, but it's named as a group. And from here, now I can go in and change the background color. I could also change the alignment of the different components. Now this business of blocks being nested inside other blocks. One of the places you'll run into that where there is tends to be some complexity to it is if you're going to try and edit your template. So suppose we want to edit this header component. So if I want to make basic changes to this, similar to the patterns, I have to say edit original. And it actually opens it up as a separate document for me. And then I can look in here to see how this is arranged. So there is a group. Within that, there is a row. And the row is a way of arranging things horizontally. It is similar to columns, except you don't have to specify the actual number or width of the columns. It's just going to space these things out easily. So within this row, I have the site logo, the site title, and optionally there's a place to put a tagline. So then there is the navigation block, which is where we would add additional menus to our navigation item. Within that, there is this other row that is tucked in here that has a couple of components for social media links and login. And again, this is going to be different for whatever theme you choose, may have a different arrangement of this, may not necessarily have all these components. Typically, as part of the header, you do have a navigation block. But there are also themes where the navigation might be on a sidebar on the left-hand side or the right-hand side of the page, rather than being at the top. And so if I wanted to make changes to this, I could, for example, decide that I don't like the blue background here, and I'm going to make this yellow, and I'll make the text blue, and save that. If I go out and view the site, I will see where this has changed here. And maybe I see some things that I need to go back and change, like this is not visible enough. and say that this styling isn't quite right. Again, I need to edit original. Make sure that the color for that is going to be readable. Let's see. Okay, it's because it's a link. All right, we need to make sure that the link color is what we want it to be. And make this blue as well. Yeah, it can be a little bit smaller, a little bit fainter, but we still want it to be in there. Now, I would encourage you to take this tutorial as a set of tips on how to explore through these different tabs, the different settings. Make sure that you know how to make sure that the tabs are displayed on the right-hand side if they're not. Now, if the sidebar is not displayed, we can click to display it. There's also a distinction between the block tab that shows the properties of the specific block and the page tab that shows the properties of the specific page. If we were looking at an event, an RSVP event, as opposed to a page, it's going to say RSVP event up here. And then there are options for setting the specific date of the event, the RSVP on, off options, all sorts of things like that would be on the side. So it's going to say whatever type of content is in the left-hand block, and then in the right-hand block is where we would see the things of the specific property. Generally, when you first open up the document, it's going to show those properties for the overall document. As soon as you select a specific block, it's going to show you the properties for that block. But notice something here. When I'm looking at this version, which is running on the production version of WordPress, you don't see that first content tab that we do see over here for an image. So this actually changed because this website is running the pre-release version of WordPress 7. It'll be released within a week, so that's what I concentrated on showing you. But these things do change on a regular basis, so you may have to hunt around to find these settings. The important thing is to know that they're going to be in here, that there are places that you can change the formatting of an image, and you can decide whether we want to have rounded corners on the image or not. More specific settings for whether we want to have a border on the image, how thick that border should be. These are all things that you can change through the visual controls, or in some cases you can enter a number. So that's a 5-pixel border. I got a support call recently from the webmaster of this site that has profiles of club leaders with something about their title, those of them who are officers, website links, and a space for a testimonial. And the thing that was confusing this webmaster was, why is there extra space here that he didn't see in others? Where's that extra space coming from? At first I thought it must be something that needed to be changed with the margin, either on this paragraph or on the image. But what it actually turned out to be is that with every image you can have a caption, and there were actually several blank lines inserted in here. I believe he had been copying and pasting this content into the page, and so it had interpreted some of that content as including extra blank lines. And we don't want any extra blank lines because that does add extra space. They're interpreted as line breaks rather than paragraphs, because the caption is really only meant to normally be a few words, but there are some controls in here that allow you to do bold and italic and to add a link. I am a big believer in WordPress. I put a lot of time into developing WordPress plugins, both for business use and for my work with Toastmasters clubs. I encourage you to learn to love WordPress, but I admit that WordPress loses people sometimes. I hope that some of these tips will help you be a little bit less lost.